Welcome to the first of two videos on the controversy between Locke and Leibniz over innate ideas. So now we're going to be taking a big shift in our course. We're going to be jumping ahead 50 years in looking at this controversy. And then next week, we're going to be jumping ahead again another 50 years to look at Hume's inquiry. So you can get an idea of this just by looking at the dates. So Descartes published the Meditations in 1641. And now we're jumping ahead to Locke's essay concerning human understanding, which was 1689. And right before the essay concerning human understanding, Sir Isaac Newton published his Principia in 1687, which was tremendously influential on the intellectual developments that came after. I mean, when Principia was published, it was like, oh my God, here it is. This is the completed physics, the completed science for the new way of viewing the world, and it was just an immediate bombshell. I mean, people were very impressed, and it was a tremendously influential work for the rest of the 17th and 18th centuries. So turning to Locke's essay, which was published 2 years after Principia. The essay concerning human understanding covers a lot of the same ground as the Meditations, but from a very different vantage point, from what gets called the empiricists, or Locke was the first of the empiricists, or a vantage point that stressed empirical natural science over rational natural science and mathematics. And we read today also a selection from Gottfried Leibniz's new essays on human understanding, which was composed as a response to Locke's essay. So you'll notice the name is very similar, but they're new essays. And Leibniz, indeed, in the new essays, one of the characters is explicitly modeled after Locke, and is expressing and defending positions that Locke defended in his essay concerning human understanding. And the new essay is structured like a dialogue, one of the characters of whom is presenting Locke's position, the other is presenting Leibniz's position. Leibniz composed the new essays on human understanding from 1695 to 1705. So upon reading the essay concerning human understanding, Leibniz began composing this work, but it wasn't published until 1765. And the reason is that Leibniz finished the work and was about to send it off to the publisher when he heard that Locke passed away in 1704. And because he heard Locke died, he thought it would be in poor taste to publish a book devoted to refuting the core doctrines of Locke's philosophy now that Locke had passed away and couldn't respond to the work. And so Leibniz thought it would be in poor taste, and he decided just not to publish the new essays at all. And so that's why they didn't get published until much later, until after Leibniz's own death. And they were published finally in 1765. So in this video, what I want to do is give you a little background on Locke and Leibniz and their controversy, say a little bit about the difference in method between the two thinkers, which will be deepened when we turn to Hume later on, because this new method that Locke is going to be presenting with us, it's taken even farther by Hume. And so next week, we'll be looking at it in more depth. And then in the video after, so not in this video, but in the video after, we'll be turning to the dispute over innate ideas between Locke and Leibniz and examining that. So first, some background on Locke and Leibniz. So both Locke and Leibniz were leading intellectuals of their day. Locke started off as he was born into a house of modest means. They weren't well off sort of middle lower class family, but he was sort of discovered and sent to fancy schools that educated him well, and he ends up going to Oxford, and he's not very into the Aristotelian philosophy that's taught there, but there are new researchers who are involved in the new science and the new scientific revolution who are making tremendous advances in all sorts of domains, and he sort of falls in with a group of these guys and becomes very interested in medicine and becomes a physician. And for a while he's based in Oxford until about the middle of his life, when he moves to London. And he participated in the early days of the English Royal Society, which is kind of the big English group of scientists, the big organization for English scientists. And a key figure in the early days of the English Royal Society was Sir Francis Bacon. And Bacon wrote a book called The New Organon, laying out a new method for studying scientific topics and making progress in science. And Newton was also a member in this Royal Society. And through this society, Robert Boyle became Locke's mentor. And Robert Boyle, his experiments with vacuums led to the invention of the barometer. He was a pretty formidable scientist in his own right. And Locke also then later became very politically active, and he met Lord Shaftesbury, who's one of the most important figures in English politics at the time, and became his personal physician. And that was when he moved to London. And Shaftesbury sort of brought Locke in on a lot of his projects, and Shaftesbury had a sizable land holding in the Carolinas, and as a result, Locke was actually involved in writing some of the founding documents of South Carolina, some of the oldest founding documents of our state. And so that's what I want to say by way of background. We're going to be examining Locke's theory of knowledge, where he tried to integrate Boyle and Bacon's empiricism with what he learned from Descartes and his new metaphysics in reading the Meditations. Leibniz, on the other hand, was from Leipzig, Germany, and he was a brilliant mathematician, physicist, jurist, and historian, and all-around Renaissance man. He invented the calculus contemporaneously with Newton, and when he was younger, he traveled a great deal and spent 4 years in Paris, where he met Pascal and Descartes, and was very influenced by both of them, as well as many other of the sort of leading figures. And later in life, I mean, so the money sort of ran out, and he had to go back to Germany. But later in life, he carried on extensive correspondences with a lot of these same folks and many others, and sort of became this tremendously influential Renaissance man who did all sorts of different things and made advances in all sorts of domains, but one of which was philosophy. And from an early age, he was very influenced by ancient philosophers like Plato and Aristotle. And he worked really hard to integrate the truths that he found in the ancients with the metaphysics of the new science set up by Descartes. So tremendously influenced by Descartes, but also tremendously influenced by Plato and Aristotle in the ancients. Okay, so that's sort of what I wanted to say by way of background. Now let me say a little bit about method, and some of the main disputes or differences between Locke and Leibniz. So one main dimension of difference is going to be over innate ideas. So for Locke and for Hume, all of our ideas, all of our thoughts begin with sensations, with things that we passively take in through the senses. And on their view, the soul is like a tabula rasa, a blank slate, something without anything written on it. And it's like the soul is like a window, and things shine through the window of the senses, and thereby get taken in and make marks on the slate of the soul, the tabula rasa. And so this is, of course, a very different picture than the kind of picture that we get in Descartes or in Leibniz. So Locke is going to be returning to experience and conceiving of knowledge, like the scholastics and the Aristotelians, as deriving from experience. So remember our three propositions, right? I mean, we had this, Aristotle and the scholastics held that nothing is in the intellect that wasn't first in the senses. So their idea is we first encounter things, become acquainted with objects through the senses, and then through abstraction from the forms that we take in through the senses, we form ideas of them, right? That was what we looked at in Aristotle. But remember, with Descartes, we saw that, well, no, what we know first and best, we know through the intellect alone, through judgment. And Leibniz is going to agree here. So Leibniz is with Descartes on this point. And Locke and Hume, on the other hand, so Kant sort of famously divides up the philosophers before him in the modern period, and he claims folks like Leibniz and Descartes and Spinoza, they're all what he calls rationalists, and folks like Locke, Berkeley, and Hume are going to be, or what he calls empiricists. And the core tenet of empiricism is that all of our knowledge derives first from experience, right? And so they end up rejecting all of those arguments from the third and fifth meditations for innate ideas and the second meditation. You'll notice, even on first blush, this view of the empiricists bears some resemblance to the scholastic view. Since it seems, I mean, Locke and Hume, they seem to be siding with the scholastics on the question of whether the intellect can know anything on its own or has any ideas within itself, right? So, you know, both of these guys seem to be rejecting innate ideas. And that's sort of the big point of contrast, or the first big point of contrast between the empiricist philosophers and rationalist philosophers like Leibniz and Descartes. The second big point of contrast that I want to bring out in this video is over method. So Locke and Hume proceed not according to the rational order of ideas, but temporally or historically. So Locke is going to be interested in a kind of genetic order of ideas, how ideas are born and arise in the mind, particularly over the course of the individual. Whereas Descartes and Leibniz want to sift through our ideas and figure out what their rational order is, right? I mean, so we saw that Descartes is taking all of the opinions that he already had, the ones that he acquired haphazardly over the course of his life, and wanted to throw them all out and look for those ideas among them that are most basic and most certain, and then go on to establish the new science on the basis of these. And by doing so, Descartes set out to thereby establish a kind of rational ordering among his ideas. But Locke is really going to proceed differently. He's got a more historical way of proceeding, where he wants to look at how ideas arise in the mind, how they're generated, or the genetic order of ideas. And in particular, he wants to look at how ideas develop over the course of the life of the individual, in order to see what the limits of our possible knowledge are, what the extent of our possible knowledge is, and in order to set to one side fruitless debates on, say, topics in religion or politics. I'll come back to this difference in method when we turn to Hume next week. But now in the next video, let me turn to this dispute over innate ideas.